thank you so much again, everybody, for spending your Thursday with us. Today's session is called Planning for Failure, Ensuring Resilience Through Disaster Preparation, presented today here by TestRail and our friends and partners at iTmethods. So first off, I want to introduce our two speakers that we have with us today. Chris Feralia is a solution architect and testing advocate with TestRail. Chris has 15 plus years of enterprise software development, integration, and testing experience, spanning domains of nuclear power generation and healthcare IT. And we are joined by John Hayes from iTmethods, who is their senior operations manager. He leads a team managing enterprise DevOps tools for global customers. With extensive experience in public cloud, DevOps, and IT infrastructure, John has been driving enterprise technology initiatives since joining iTmethods in November 2017. Thanks so much, John, for joining us today. Your expertise is going to lend itself very well to the topics at hand. And again, here's his email and LinkedIn as well, if you would like to connect after the session. So we just wanted to take a moment ahead of this topic to cover why disaster preparation is so important. It's great that you're all here today and interested in the topic because that's the biggest and hardest first step. As we'll cover in our presentation, a lack of ownership and awareness overall tends to be the biggest obstacle when it comes to disaster preparation. This is an area that often cuts across both QA and site reliability engineers or cloud engineers. And because of this, it tends not to have definitive ownership or strategic priority. Nobody's really sure whose court this ball lands in. It's often overlooked, and often teams are just unaware of it completely. They don't know what it is or why it's important, unless they're working in a regulated industry where it's more commonly mandated. We hope the session today provides you with some new insights and actionable takeaways to take back to your organization for disaster preparation success, and you're armed with the knowledge to learn more about what you're already doing or make plans to get more formalized infrastructure in place. This topic is an especially great fit for partnerships like the one between TestRail and iTmethods, bringing together TestRail's QA knowledge and iTmethods' expertise in DevOps and cloud infrastructure strategy and implementation. This is the perfect intersection of the two realms in which disaster preparation lives, which is why we're so grateful for their partnership and so happy to have John Hayes on here with us today. We would also just like to brag a little bit and mention that iTmethods is our first platinum partner in our partnership program. And together, we've helped enterprises streamline their testing processes, improve software quality, and accelerate time to market. So just to go over the agenda before we dig in, today we're going to cover what is disaster recovery, have an introduction to disaster recovery infrastructure, go over some real-world disaster scenarios and how they might have been avoided, validating of disaster recovery infrastructure, continuous improvement processes to put in place, then moving on to some useful resources, and finally time for Q&A. And with that, I will now hand it off to Chris and John to take us home.
All right, welcome everybody. So I first want to kind of talk about before I hand this off to John, just as Jeslyn did, and thank you, Jeslyn, for the great intro. Try to deep dive a little bit what it means kind of to me, and this isn't like a textbook definition, but really what does it mean to me when we talk about the context of disaster recovery? And it's really a multifaceted topic, and especially as we dig in later, we talk about actually validation and validation strategies of it. So really the idea here for disaster recovery at a very high level, right, is the whole process of restoring data, applications, and infrastructure during like these various disaster scenarios. Some of these mechanisms to actually do that may be what we would consider more rollback procedures, doing point-in-time restores for databases, rolling back application versions. So this idea of kind of rolling back or having controlled restoration points, and John will get into all these type of topics and some ways that this kind of occurs. And then the other one here we talk about is failover, right? So something happens, how are we using redundancy and infrastructure to perform some sort of failover, whether it's some type of regional outage, a hardware failure, data corruption, using data backups and infrastructure resiliency is another area for failover. So we'll talk about that, and more specifically for my side, some validation of how to validate that these type of mechanisms. And John will go into a lot of details on what these mechanisms are. So with that said, I'll turn it over to John. Thank you again, John, for joining us today to kind of give an intro to disaster recovery and kind of tell us all the things that are available to us.
Great. Thank you, Chris. All right, let's dive into disaster recovery infrastructure then. So we got three key concepts to wrap our heads around here: high availability, fault tolerance, and disaster recovery. Think of these as your three musketeers in the fight against system failures. First up, high availability, or HA. This is all about keeping your systems up and running as much as possible. It's like having a backup generator for your house. When the power goes out, you barely notice because the backup kicks in seamlessly. Next, we have fault tolerance, or FT. This is your system's ability to keep functioning even when things sometimes go wrong. Imagine you're driving a car, one tire goes flat. You can still drive to the nearest service station. That's fault tolerance in action. And finally, disaster recovery, or DR. This is your plan B when things really go south. It's about getting back on your feet as quickly as possible after a major incident. Now, when we talk about DR, there are two key metrics you need to know: RPO and RTO. RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective. It's basically asking, how much data can we afford to lose? RTO, or Recovery Time Objective, is all about how quickly we need to be back up and running. Think of it this way. RPO is like asking, if our system crashed right now, how far back in time would our most recent backup take us? And RTO is like asking, if our system went down, how long can we afford to be offline before it starts seriously impacting our business? Understanding these concepts and metrics is crucial because they form the foundation of any solid disaster recovery plan. They help us guide realistic goals and expectations and help us make decisions about what kind of infrastructure and processes we need to put in place. So keep these in mind as we dive deeper into the world of disaster recovery. Let's talk about how AWS helps us achieve high availability. First up, we have multi-availability zone deployments. This is like spreading your eggs across multiple baskets. If one zone goes down, your application stays up in the others. Next, there's elastic load balancing, which is essentially a traffic cop for your incoming requests, making sure no single server gets overwhelmed. Finally, we have EC2 with auto-scaling. Think of this as your application's ability to flex its muscles when the workload gets heavy, automatically adding more power when needed. Moving on to fault tolerance. This is all about keeping your system running even when things go wrong. EC2 auto-scaling isn't just for handling load, it also replaces unhealthy instances. It's like having a backup player ready to jump in when someone gets injured. Elastic Kubernetes Service, or EKS, takes this a step further with multi-region clusters. Imagine having your team spread across different cities. If one city has a problem, the others can pick up the slack. Lastly, we have Global Accelerator and Route 53, which are like smart GPS systems, always routing your users to the healthiest endpoints. Now, let's dive into the heart of disaster recovery. Cross-region replication is like having a twin of your data in another part of the world. If disaster strikes in one region, you've got a backup ready to go. Point-in-time recovery is your time machine. It lets you roll back to a specific moment before things went wrong. AWS Backup is like your digital safe, keeping all your critical data secure and ready for recovery. And finally, we have the Elastic Disaster Recovery Service. Think of this as your emergency response team, ready to replicate and recover your entire server setup if needed. We're now going to move on to some real-world disaster scenarios. So theory is great, but let's get real. We're going to look at some actual scenarios that have happened in the wild. These aren't just hypotheticals. They're events that caught organizations off guard and taught us valuable lessons about disaster preparation. Let's talk about everyone's nightmare, ransomware. In 2020, the University of California got hit hard. The impact? Extended outage, data loss, and a hefty bill to recover their data. But there's good news. AWS has some solid solutions to prevent this kind of disaster. We're talking about secure backups using AWS Backup with an encrypted vault. It's like a digital Fort Knox for your data. Then there's immutable storage with S3 and object versioning, which means even if someone tries to mess with your data, you've always got a clean copy. Remember the great AWS East outage of 2021? Yeah, that was not a fun day for a lot of companies. The impact? Extended outage across multiple services. But here's how you can protect yourself. Multi-region architecture. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Or in this case, not putting all your services in one region. We're talking cross-region replication, smart routing with Route 53 and Global Accelerator, and something called a pilot-light deployment. Think of it as keeping a small flame always burning, ready to ignite your full system in another region if needed. And here's a pro tip. Decouple your services. It's like building a ship with multiple watertight components. If one part goes down, the others stay afloat. Now, let's talk about how iTmethods can help you. We will create a disaster recovery plan that's as unique as your business. First, we need to know your RPO and RTO. How much data can we afford to lose, and how quickly do we need to be back up? Then we can help you deploy your services to multiple regions and countries. We provide a dedicated team for rapid response, supported by a comprehensive monitoring and alerting platform, because when disaster strikes, every second counts. Automation is key here. The less human intervention needed, the faster we can help you recover. And of course, we want to help you optimize costs, because a good DR plan shouldn't break the bank. Last but not least, test, test, and test again. A DR plan is only as good as its last successful test, which is something Chris will be discussing in detail later. Now that we've covered disaster recovery, let's talk about another critical aspect of modern IT infrastructure, AI and machine learning. As we've seen with disaster recovery, having the right tools and infrastructure in place is crucial. The same principle applies to our AI journey. Many organizations are looking to leverage AI and ML, but aren't sure where to start or how to build a robust infrastructure to support these initiatives. This is where iTmethods comes in with our AI workbench. It's designed to make your AI journey smoother and more efficient. Think of it as a comprehensive toolkit for deploying top-tier ML, AI, and generative AI tools and models. The key question to ask yourself is, how are you thinking about your AI journey and its building blocks? Are you considering factors like scalability, integration with existing systems, and the expertise needed to implement and maintain AI solutions? iTmethods offers the expertise to guide you through these considerations. Our AI workbench provides a seamless deployment process for advanced AI and ML tools, taking much of the complexity out of the equation. If you're interested in learning more about how the AI workbench can accelerate your AI initiatives, I encourage you to reach out to us at innovate@itmethods.com for more information or to discuss your specific needs. Remember, just as with disaster recovery, having the right infrastructure and support for your AI projects can make all the difference in their success and impact on your business. And with that, I'd like to hand over back to Chris.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Don. Great insights. And really, this is a great transition point of kind of getting a base understanding of RTO and RPO, and really the basis of defining requirements of what systems you're going to put in place to actually make disaster recovery, failover, rollback, and all these concepts possible. And just like we do in software, these now build the requirements of how we're going to think about validation and testing of this type of infrastructure and really these type of capabilities. So we'll kind of get right in with that and talk about, this idea of test, kind of giving a play on the title of this webinar, test planning for failure. So we know that we have infrastructure in place and we follow guidance, and using all these great insights that John mentioned about all this tooling, whether it's AWS or even other cloud-based platforms. One of the key things we really need to do, and really there's three things here that I look at when I used to do disaster recovery, failover execution, and planning, is really defining scenarios by mapping our infrastructure requirements and aligning that with our system under test. Just like we would do if we were enhancing the UI UX or building new functionality for login or authentication into an application, requirements that we have for driving disaster recovery, rollback, failover, incorporating those RPO and RTO and all these type of concepts, we need to test plan directly and map scenarios for these requirements of what is either plausible, probable, or what is mandated by compliance. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. The other thing is identifying incorporating kind of less SLAs or time-based service requirements. And again, this is the RTRPO that John started to talk about. And meaning, whenever we do this, what type of time constraints and service level agreements do we have, for instance, to recover our actual software or potentially minimize or is acceptable for end users if there is any? And the reason being is that needs to factor in for our test plan. So for instance, a quick example would be maybe we need to do a point in time restore in a database. How much time do we have to roll the database back, repoint it and reconfigure it, maybe recycle an application? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 6 hours? If we're outside of that, are we considering that pass-fail criteria for the validation of that type of rollback or disaster type planning? And then the last thing here is really creating detailed setup prerequisite step-by-step instructions. How are you going to actually track this? And this is a really big factor when we start talking about compliance. One of the compliance requirements of anybody in this call is in the healthcare space. A lot of disaster recovery and process type compliance for frameworks like HITRUST are something that are looked at for HITRUST certification and how organizations manage, reproduce, test, and execute these type of disaster operations that John went through. So like the screenshot I have in this slide is actually of a test execution and run for a specific disaster recovery plan managed within TestRail. We're not saying that TestRail is, the tool to use. We obviously think it's a great platform and provides great traceability and management for these type of validation exercises. But having something in place that gives you some type of process control and traceability and something that's reproducible for these plans are really, really essential. So we'll go in transition here and talk about some advanced topics that some people may have heard of, maybe not heard of. We talk about leveraging tooling to then integrate this with our validation strategy for our disaster recovery validation, right? How are we going to use some tooling to kind of confirm the resilience of the mechanisms that we put in place? These things John talked about, for instance, maybe we have a ransomware attack and we need to restore in AWS EFS, our shared file system. How quickly can we do that? Or maybe we're using EKS and Kubernetes, which is more applicable to this kind of example that I'm going to talk about. What type of resilience for scaling, auto scaling, or recreating pods in a Kubernetes cluster when there's a network outage or a pod suddenly terminates? These type of scenarios can be done manually and align with our step-by-step actual disaster recovery guides, maybe that we add in TestRail or other tooling that you want to actually track and have it be traceable. We can also incorporate this concept of chaos engineering that uses tools and automation to leverage and augment what we're already doing for our base disaster recovery planning. Chaos engineering was really first kind of pioneered, or at least started at Netflix, using a tool called Chaos Monkey and one of their deployment mechanisms called Spinnaker. Chaos Mesh is the other tool I have here, which actually is a variation of that they use for Kubernetes clusters. So it's a K8 specific tool. And basically, it actually is configured where you can do some randomized and automated sequencing of these failure type scenarios, termination of pods, disconnecting network connectivity, doing some replication and auto scaling. And a lot of these features we can do under randomized conditions or sequenced, and we can do them in combination with each other to identify how resilient is some of this infrastructure and really how well is the orchestration of the tooling based on how you set it up for a lot of these concepts, again, that John has mentioned. Are we really getting the desired resiliency, rollback, and failover behavior in the allotted time that our organization requires? And we have to test these just like we would for features, just like we'd run automation for the front end or UI or performance or load testing for backend infrastructure. Chaos engineering can be a really effective way to start building validation of resilience inside of this defined infrastructure. And then the last thing here really gives us some really good, more randomized sampling of SLAs on recovery. If we don't know what's exactly going to happen, which usually is how it occurs for actual infrastructure, quote unquote, disasters or events, we can get a really good idea of what realistic SLAs would be with the tooling we have set up. Once we've identified, here's what actually chaos engineering is produced, here's what the failure is. Let's leverage the tools or leverage tooling that's automatically going to do that, or maybe some semi kind of human intervention. How quickly can we actually realistically recover? And does that align with our SLAs for the sampling of disaster events in these type of scenarios? And I believe both of these tools are free, both Chaos Mesh and Chaos Monkey. And then you'll notice in the top here, like I have another screenshot of like a test case. We can leverage test cases with integration automation, and specifically in this type into TestRail as well. So you can really start building a central model of how we're doing validation both manually and leveraging automated tooling to kind of build this validation scheme in test planning for disaster recovery. And that kind of leads us to kind of the tail end of what I want to talk about. Once we've really identified what our infrastructure is, maybe we've augmented or added it, put some new tools into practice, whether it's point-in-time restores for database, backups or replication for our shared file system, S3, other types of storage, or maybe switching over to more containerized distributed deployments using tools like Kubernetes and EKS. Once we do that, and then we validate it so we know what to expect, we know what it's going to do. We also really have to use the same type of traceability and test practices that we would do for features, especially in regulated environments, for maintaining records of how actually this is working and how we've done, maybe quarter over quarter, year over year, depending on whenever you want to do the validation, understanding what level of proficiency and pass-fail criteria we're doing on our infrastructure is just as important. So maintaining these traceable records should really be something that we output, whether we're doing this again in various, annually, biweekly, quarterly, whether it's via some automated process, in maintaining these records. I have an example report, which is a test run and summary report, which may be an example that you could use like for a quarterly disaster recovery validation, which is very common and some of our users at TestRail. So you can see I've customized this report, and it shows a simple breakdown of pass-fail ratio, maybe tests that we didn't fully execute or finish, or maybe we're working on infrastructure. And it's just a sample of like some of the output, or robust output we want to store. And really, this aggregation of results, we should have readily tagged, defined, and traceable. So again, in this example, I say Q3 2024 is just the example duration and time, disaster recovery validation, and then this report gives a deep dive of everything we did. It's stored in a central location, it's tracked to the activity, and then we have traceable test cases that link back to what we're actually testing, what was run, whether it was generated from these chaos engineering tools or done via a manual stepwise test case that's versioned. And then having clear summary level reporting for then the overall results. And that's really more what the top level of this report is showing. But where are we passing and where are we failing? And from an auditing perspective, this type of audit level sampling is really critical of what are we now doing with it? Are we having defects that are basically created, feature requests, infrastructure change tickets or change requests to then augment, change, or modify how infrastructure is built based on the end result of maybe the backup worked, but it took 2 hours longer than what we anticipated. Or maybe we didn't have our point-in-time restores in a certain frequency or duration, and now we're experiencing data loss where we didn't really think of it. So the execution, summary, and traceability is really what we want to do to look at building these type of models of validation and approaching test planning just like we would test features in an application, but applying it to all the nuances and controls and features that John talked about whenever we're looking at cloud-based disaster recovery infrastructure. So hopefully that provides some insights for everyone on the call. I think this is always a unique topic. Talking a little bit about topics related to both creation and then validation of this type of infrastructure. We always like to kind of transition toward the end before we take questions on a lot of our webinars, especially the last few that I've done, for doing an area for continuous improvement. Like what can everybody on this call think about or evaluate for their teams to maybe improve in these areas? And I know John and also myself for TestRail will have some resources here in a bit. But these are really some actionable things that I think that we really should look at for measuring some type of success. One of the things, and sometimes it can be hard, John mentioned some great examples that, have really happened, right? These real world type of issues. And I think that's the first place that teams should really start. Even if you're in a QA focused role that may not overlap or have as much collaboration with your cloud engineering, site reliability teams, or engineering groups, really trying to understand, track, and measure what does our downtime and outages look like over a given period? Did we have any actual system downtime and outages, and really understanding why that was? And what was the effectiveness of the actual disaster recovery procedures if we did have them and they were used? Maybe for instance, we had I've seen this like a batch job or something is run, and maybe it incorrectly wiped out a bunch of data and we had to do a point in time restore. Like, how effective were our procedures and how much did this actually work? Or maybe it didn't work. Were you able to recover data or recover the system? Like, what level of success do we have? And then whatever level of success that is, we should look at and kind of almost root cause, like what amount of time and what were the impact to the users? You know, it was down for maybe 3 days, but we did recover. Well, that's great that our procedures work, but it sounds like a very long duration SLA for a production system to be down for days. So that's one thing to think about. And then also data loss. We talked about that. And I spoke a little bit about my background in with high compliance and highly regulated industries. A lot of times data loss and losing data, especially for instance, like in the healthcare space with PHI or patient health information under HIPAA here in the US, we have a lot of laws that govern both the protected data and maintaining that data. So if there's data loss, that's something we should look at as well in maintaining compliance for what the data we're supposed to have and be protected. And then using that, we really should look at what actionable improvements, right? So we're actually measuring it and seeing where we're falling in these kind of areas and looking at actually implementing or upgrading our disaster recovery infrastructure. And I know John gave like a great amount of detail and a lot of tooling around AWS. Other platforms, cloud platforms have similar type of features. And again, I know he has some resources to talk about for everybody in the call at the end. So that's something to really think about. If we're not hitting the mark on having infrastructure, we don't know what infrastructure, or you know, we're really just uncertain. That's really an area to really double down on and really start to get that in place. And then phase two is obviously then once you get those in place, or maybe you already have some, is really start looking at the validation of the scenarios with some of the mechanisms that I mentioned. Do you have a controlled and stepwise process and test plan in a test management tool that you can version, revise, and track quarter to quarter, year to year, month to month, however you want to do it, that actually ensures this level of resilience? You know, do we also implement tooling that try to ensure the robustness under some type of like randomization or automated type events? Looking at chaos engineering. You know, we have a K8s cluster and you're using Kubernetes. How resilient or how does the actual distributed container environment, like using EKS for example, how well does that actually position you for the SLA or the uptime requirements that you actually need? How well does it scale? Maybe you even mix in some load and performance testing along with this type of DR validation. So having a good disaster recovery validation plan to augment your DR tools and plan is really important in a lot of the content that we talked about today. And then the last thing here is looking at frequencies for backups and data loss. Everything, you know, you may check all the boxes and we're doing this. We're backing data. We have this redundancy, our RPO and RTO, and you understand these concepts, and this aligns to our SLA times. But we're only doing full snapshot backups, maybe of a production database or a file system once every month. But that's not really going to help us in certain data loss or edge case scenarios for disaster recovery. Maybe that's okay, maybe that's not. But that's something that we need to really look at. What frequency of some of these backups or point-in-time restores or some of the edge case type scenarios, does that really support what we want to do from an availability, data retention, and operational perspective? So with that said, I think we'll kind of transition toward the end and talk a little bit about some resources. We mentioned a lot, and I want to give John a few minutes. Before I do that, I just want to mention like very briefly about some of the resources we have at TestRail. So we obviously have a lot of resources specific to software test management with TestRail Enterprise. There's a lot of links here. You can basically go and learn anything you want about some of the reports, test case management, and how to really integrate disaster recovery using a test case management tool. We have full capability for that. We also have our third edition of the software testing and quality report, which is here in the middle, which we pulled like thousands of our end users. So this will give you really great insights for various topics around testing, compliance, highly regulated, and even non-regulated industries. We do both to give some insights on how to kind of better mold your testing. We have some tutorials. We do have actually some links in the solution overview of what both TestRail in partnership with iTmethods and iTmethods information on this slide if you want to use that. So we have a lot of resources from that side. I do want to hand it back over to John, and I know that he has something to kind of offer the audience here, the attendees for this around disaster preparation assessment. So, which is really awesome, and I think a great resource for everybody. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, John, and what you guys are doing. I think this is a really incredible opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, that was some great content there. Yeah, before we wrap up, I'm excited to share an exclusive offer for all of you who attended today's webinar. As a token of our appreciation for your time and engagement, we're offering a free assessment on disaster recovery, failover, and high availability. This isn't just any assessment, it's a comprehensive evaluation tailored specifically to your organization's needs. Let me break down what you'll get. First, our top-tier specialists will dive deep into your current infrastructure to uncover potential risks you might not even be aware of. It's like having a team of expert detectives examining your systems for vulnerabilities. Next, based on what we find, we'll provide you with tailored recommendations. These aren't one-size-fits-all solutions, but strategies designed to address your organization's unique challenges and goals. Finally, we'll help you enhance your overall resilience. Our aim is to strengthen your systems so that you can recover quickly and maintain operations, even when faced with unexpected disruptions. This offer is only available to today's webinar attendees, and it's time limited. You have until October 30th to take advantage of this opportunity. To get started, simply reach out to us at innovate@itmethods.com. Our team is ready and eager to help you fortify your DR plans. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Jeslyn, I think I'll turn it over to you for any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, thank you so much, John and Chris. That was a great presentation today, and thank you so much, everybody here today, for all your engagement in the polls. So now the remainder of the hour here is open for a Q&A. So if you have any questions for our experts, please put it in the Q&A box. We do have a couple questions here that we can use to kick off the conversation. So I'll just, whoever wants to take these, feel free to jump in. So if you're unaware of what strategies your organization has for disaster recovery, what are some good questions to ask to learn more?
I don't know if you want to take a partial stab at that first, John. I have a few things specific to the testing and validation side, but I don't know if you have any quick insights because I think this is a good shared question.
Yeah, I think to start with, really you want to understand within your organization, what plans do you already have in place? Again, it all really goes back to, RPO and RTO, as I mentioned earlier, how much data can you afford to lose? And how much time do you have to recover your services before it impacts your business? Start from there, understand the most critical data, and then from there, develop your disaster recovery plan and keep testing it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great insight, John. The only thing I'll add there is the way I look at disaster recovery in a lot of the details that we really both just talked about is almost define it like you would a feature. I think a lot of teams get very siloed. Fortunately, when I was heavily involved in this and various teams, we were very collaborative. But I think a lot of organizations get siloed on the topics and the requirements and how it's working. And then there's a lot of lack of cohesion, like you mentioned at the beginning, Jeslyn. So I think getting everybody together and getting a good actual requirements discussion on what we need to achieve or what we've already built just helps get everybody on the same page. And just like John said, get a good understanding and get a good plan to test and validate it and do it routinely. So
Helps if I unmute myself. Thank you so much. Great answers. We do have another one here. Within my organization, engineering feels that validation disaster recovery is not required. What are some talking points I can use here to enforce that these processes add value?
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll mention, and I know John will have some good insights for this one as well. I think the one thing from a test perspective is anytime we have production issues, I talk about this actually in several of the past webinars I've given, is really looking at root causes and actually consequences. So, if we've had issues in production or we've had problems where we've had outages or different things, I think bringing that to the table as a common ground to say, we've had issues and we really need to look from a root cause perspective on this is why they're important. And this is also why we need to do validation of them. So I think bringing that home for direct production impact, if you've had those in the past, somewhere to start. I'm curious to see what John has to say about that. I know there's a lot we can unpack with that, but that's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, plans are great and obviously important, but until you really test it in the real world, it's very hard to be sure that it's going to work and that you've really thought of everything. You know, Often when we run a DR test for the first time, we're going to work with the customer and find, okay, there were things maybe they hadn't considered that needed to be included in that. Maybe something didn't work as smoothly as was expected. It's really important to test, and I think just to get that across to the stakeholders within your company.
And I see we had a question here about, want to bring this to attention, but I'm just a tester. Any suggestion for that approach? I don't know, Chris, if you had any more specific points to kind of elaborate on there.
Yeah, I'll take this question. I was in this role at some point in my career, so I think it's a great thought, right? So, the idea of like what the tester, if you want to call it that role, is doing, um, that really is shifting. And I think the one thing to do, and I think it's a great question to bring up, is, my suggestion and approach is when we start talking about, especially in Agile, defining test related tasks or even having spikes or planned events for doing a spike on what is our disaster recovery infrastructure and building a test plan for it. If you create technical debt for these type of topics, and start bringing these up in grooming sessions or even talking about these, which I used to do, right? In the end of your test or release summary, right? If you don't know how to validate or even what disaster infrastructure you have, so you don't even know what the requirements are to test it, can you be releasing releases and saying that they're low risk, right? I mean, I would not. Now, how much can I guarantee the overall quality of the release of a product and the infrastructure under it? If I have no idea how to back up, how our application is backed up or easily recovered, and I've never validated it, these are areas where we can start throwing release type risk flags whenever we do our releases to leadership. So that's an area that I would start and get the whole team involved and go from there. I think it's an iterative approach, but great question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. I just saw one come in here when we talk about recovery, how AI stands on that. I guess how AI can incorporate itself into that. John, seems like that question's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And AI is an important tool, and it's a broad tool. And within AI, the AI umbrella, there's a lot of different tools which will help you in a lot of different ways. AI can certainly help you build a lot of your recovery plans, and it can certainly detect some of the resources that you'll need to be protecting, things like that. And there are also tools out there that'll actually help you with the process itself. It's important to use AI in a way that'll help you and that'll help, reduce the amount of human risk, human, error in that process. And the more you can automate and the more you can use AI, the better. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Um, Chris, I see here you want to talk more about root cause analysis. Anonymous attendee wrote in, people need to start thinking about root cause analysis for real and understand all the gaps that might exist. Agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't have a ton more to add to this, but I will say, whoever the attendee is or for the group, I talk about this a lot in our, and maybe we can actually add a link in the chat in the webinar video that we did for testing in regulated industries. I talk about a whole process around root cause and self-assessments, and I think this is something really great for us to really double down on. So if you haven't watched that webinar, I would say definitely take a look. You can fast forward to the end if you'd like as well. So.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. Um, and here from Vladislav, do we have data on what percentage of IT companies today have disaster preparation strategy at all? Chris, you indicated you wanted to answer that, but John might have some insights here as well.
Yeah, I'm going to lean on John. The only thing I wanted to note, we do have some questions. I don't know that directly align one-to-one in this in our software testing and quality report. So if you want to download that, there was a link on our resources slide for TestRail that has like a poll on various topics around testing and validation and certain infrastructure. I don't know if it's exactly this, but it'd be good reference for you. Um, I know from our customer base, a lot of the more regulated industries, we get more questions or more high compliance environments are more focused on this. But I know, John, I'm sure you have some insights working with your, customer base around this. Curious there too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the compliance part is key. Again, typically, yeah, compliance drives a lot of this initially. Compliance or obviously some sort of major incident, right? That often, causes companies to investigate this further. I think almost every company we work with has some level of disaster preparation. The real question is, how effective is that disaster preparation? Are the right things being protected? And that's really where we come in and we can help, to see if it's actually effective what you're doing. And obviously the testing through TestRail and make sure that it really works for you. But yeah, almost every company will have some level of disaster preparation.
Excellent. Awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your insights. Yeah, if you think of anything after the presentation or want to give kudos to John and Chris, the links to their emails and LinkedIn profiles were in the slides that we will be sharing. And thank you so much. Thank you all so much for spending your Thursday with us. This was a really great afternoon. We hope that you all are inspired to go back to your team and get serious about your disaster preparation. And TestRail and iTmethods are here to help along that process. So just let us know how we can help.